I put a GPS in my wife's bag and followed her. I found them both at his house, she with her lover, laughing, lightly, as if I didn't exist. They were so comfortable that she even took off her shoes, crossed her legs on the sofa as she did at home, and held a glass of wine as if she were at a celebratory dinner. I photographed them. One click. Just one. But in that second, time froze and my entire story came crashing down on me. I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. I just watched. In the photo, she smiles as if she had never cried for me. As if you never said you loved me. And when I showed that image in front of the whole family, at Sunday lunch, with her parents at the table, her brothers, and even our youngest son, I realized that betrayal is not just the act of being with another person. It's the silence that came after. It's the empty look. It is the absence of remorse. She didn't apologize. She didn't try to explain herself. In fact, it was beyond what I could have imagined. She had the audacity to say that I invaded her privacy, that it was abuse, that I was obsessive. And there, in front of everyone, she tried to reverse everything. He tried to turn me into the villain of the story. She said I was suffocating her. That my jealousy was the problem. That maybe, if I had been more understanding, she wouldn't have looked for someone else. And I, with my eyes fixed on her, realized that that face that I had kissed for years, that body that slept next to me every night, was hiding a whole world of lies from me. And that I, fool, spent too much time believing in promises that were never meant to be kept. The lover didn't say a word. He lowered his head like a coward. And that's how I discovered who he was. A family acquaintance. Someone who frequented our house. Who has already eaten from my barbecue. Who got beer from my fridge. He wasn't a stranger. It was a familiar face, who smiled at me more than once while, behind my back, he lived a second life with my wife. Hypocrisy had a name and a face. But at that moment, the face that hurt me the most was hers. Because I believed her. I defended her so many times. I faced the world for her. And now I was the one being judged as the sick one, the insecure one, the man who put on a tracker because he didn't trust it. The truth is that I trusted. And that's exactly what destroyed me. The mistake was not having installed the GPS. The mistake was having trusted for so long. I ignored the signs. Messages deleted. Extended hours. The long baths. The distant looks. And even with all the alarms, I chose to believe. Because those who love, choose not to see. And when he sees it, he still tries to forgive. But forgiveness is not born where there is no repentance. And she didn't regret it. Not a second. Instead, he left his parents' house that day like a victim. Like a wronged woman who was exposed in front of her family. As if the betrayal was not hers, but mine. Because I followed her. Because I photographed her. Because I had proof. And what no one expected was what came next. Because it wasn't just public shame that weighed on her. That was what was about to be revealed. A secret kept for months. A conspiracy that involved more than infidelity. And at that moment, when I thought I had seen everything, I realized that I was just on the surface. The truth was much more buried than I imagined. And the one who hurt me the most wasn't her. He was the one who helped her. It was the one who knew and kept quiet. People I considered my blood. People who saw me suffering and still smiled by my side. When everything came to a head, it wasn't just my marriage that ended. It was the image I had of love. From the family. Of loyalty. The consequences of the betrayal went beyond what was expected. I lost the ground. I lost nights of sleep. I even lost my hunger. But I gained something too. I gained clarity. I gained strength. I gained the chance to rebuild myself. And it was when everything seemed lost, when I swore I would never be able to trust anyone again, that she appeared. Someone who showed me that not all affection is a lie. That not every touch hides intentions. And for the first time in months, I smiled without pain. But before that, I had to face hell. I needed to hear from her that she cheated on me because she needed to feel alive. That I was too predictable. That the routine killed her inside. I needed to hear that her lover made her laugh, made her feel desired. As if I were to blame for your choices. And it was on that day that I discovered that the cruelest part of betrayal is not the kiss given to another. It's the disregard for the scars she leaves. Because she didn't even once look at me as someone who was suffering. She saw herself as a martyr. Like someone who had to look outside for what they didn't have at home. As if I were a burden. As if loving was a sentence. The day after the scandal, the messages arrived. Relatives trying to understand. Shocked friends. Some judging me for exposing everything. Others applauding me for having courage. But everyone wants details. As if my pain were entertainment. As if my suffering could be summarized in audios and prints. And I, silent, just watched. I didn't want to tell. I wanted to forget. But forgetting is impossible when the betrayal lives in your memory. When she lies with you. When she invades your dreams. When you hear her name and still feel something tighten in your chest. I tried to understand. Interest. I tried to look for answers within myself. Have I failed as a husband? Have I neglected it? Did I not listen to her when she needed me? But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more I saw that there was no justification. Because those who love, talk. Whoever loves, asks for help. Whoever loves, tries. She didn't try. She planned. She manipulated. She lied. And as much as it hurts to admit, she moved on before I even realized I had been left behind. What she didn't expect, however, was what was to come. Because in that same family group where I shared the photo, someone responded. Someone who has seen more than one betrayal. Who recognized something, or someone, in the image. And then the game started to change. What was hidden would begin to be unearthed. What seemed like simple infidelity was just the tip of the iceberg. The real shock wasn't seeing her with someone else. It was discovering how willing she was to lie. How much she had done this before. How firmly the mask had been stuck to his face for years. And the worst, how much she counted on help from people who should never have gotten involved. Now, everything changes. Because betrayal doesn't end with discovery. It starts there. It multiplies in the consequences. In losses. In trials. In the looks. In the silences. And mainly, in the truths that begin to emerge. One of them, in particular, will be responsible for changing everything. And once it is revealed, there will be no turning back. Do you think you've heard stories of cheating before? Perhaps yes. But none like this. Because this time, whoever was betrayed didn't stay on the ground. Whoever was betrayed decided to turn the tables. And when the tables turn, someone always pays the price. The question is, are you ready to find out who will fall first? Welcome to the channel. Here, we make one thing very clear, we do not support and will never romanticize any type of betrayal. All stories told are fictional, created to show with intensity how infidelity destroys lives, families and hearts. The objective is one, to make you reflect on the real consequences of thoughtless choices. Now take a deep breath, prepare yourself. You're about to hear a story shocking, intense and unforgettable. Jonathan has always had a life that many would consider stable. He grew up in a simple home, with loving parents and solid principles, those that teach that love is patience, commitment and respect. He carried with him the idea that relationships require mutual dedication, even when time and routine begin to erode the shine of the first years. He was a practical, observant and discreet man. He worked as a financial analyst in a medium-sized company and, despite the repetitive routine, he found satisfaction in knowing that his efforts were building a safe home. He married Isabel at the age of 28, a woman with an easy smile and firm gaze. She was an art teacher at a private school, sensitive to the nuances of human emotions, with a natural talent for seeing beauty where few saw it. The two formed a couple that, on the outside, was overflowing with balance. Friends defined them as accomplices, partners, almost an example of constancy in a world where relationships seemed disposable. The house where they lived was modest, but full of personality. There was no luxury, but each object told a story. A light blue vase on the living room shelf recalled the first trip they took together, a getaway to the countryside that ended in a night of unexpected rain and endless laughter. On the living room wall, paintings painted by Isabel filled the space with vibrant lines. Jonathan, who didn't understand art, always said that mix of colors made the house feel alive, as if it had a soul. He was proud of his wife, of the dedication with which she prepared his classes, of the affection she had with her students, of her patience in teaching restless children to express feelings through drawings and paints. She, in turn, always praised his sense of responsibility, his calmness when faced with problems, his ability to solve problems without getting excited. During the first few years, the marriage flowed in harmony. There was no lack of dialogue, the silences were comfortable, and Sundays were sacred. Long breakfast, soft music and a walk in the park close to home. The two cultivated simple rituals that cemented their intimacy. Jonathan knew Isabel's class schedule by heart. Sometimes I would show up at the school door just to deliver a hot coffee or chocolate on the coldest days. She, in return, wrote small notes and hid them between his clothes, making him smile discreetly when he found a "good luck at the meeting" or a "I love you," even on difficult days, when wearing a shirt. But as the years went by, routine began to stifle spontaneous gestures. Jonathan's work became more demanding, long hours in front of the computer, meetings with difficult clients, and the pressure for results began to consume part of the time he previously dedicated to home. Isabel, on the other hand, immersed herself more and more in the world of art. He started attending workshops on weekends, exhibitions and soirees. Her sensitivity emerged intensely, and she began to express on-screen emotions that, little by little, were no longer shared verbally with her husband. He noticed, but didn't comment. I thought it was a phase, that they would soon find themselves at the same pace again. He believed their love was mature enough to withstand some detours. Dinners became quieter. Affectionate messages became rare. Touch, once every day, became the exception. They still slept in the same bed, they still shared the routine, but there seemed to be an invisible glass between them, a silent distance that grew without either of them finding the courage to name it. Jonathan tried to compensate by being present in other ways. He made dinner on the nights she returned later, tidied the house on Saturdays while she rested or painted, and he never stopped asking her how her day was, even though he received increasingly automatic responses. Isabel, in turn, felt disconnected, but couldn't explain exactly what was bothering her. There was a subtle discomfort within her, as if something essential was missing that she couldn't define. I tried, in vain, to recover that lightness from the beginning, but my efforts dissolved in the rush of days. Despite the distance, there was still affection. It was not the absence of love. It was wear and tear. There was an absence of novelty, of surprises, of enchantment. What was once spontaneous now felt like effort. And over time, both began to settle for less. With the basics. With silent company. With the idea that it was just like that long marriages went through phases like this, that it was better to have peace than passion. But deep down, silence hurt more than any argument. And they both knew, even without saying it, that something essential was lost every day. They continued to go out together to family events, nephews' birthdays, dinners with friends, but the sparkle in their eyes was no longer the same. It was as if they were playing an expected role, as if the world saw in them the perfect couple that they no longer felt like they were. Isabel was smiling in the photos, but her mind was far away. Jonathan responded kindly to everyone, but he watched his wife with a look full of doubts. He didn't say anything, he preferred to remain silent, perhaps for fear of hearing a truth he wasn't ready to face. Or perhaps because they still believed that it was possible to recover what they were losing, if they had patience. He was, above all, a man who believed in reconstruction. During a family trip, on a long holiday, he realized for the first time that the distance between them was not just a reflection of routine. He saw Isabel distance herself from conversations, spend hours on her cell phone, laugh alone about something she didn't share with anyone. He noticed that her answers were short, her attention was scattered, and that she avoided physical contact as if she feared giving herself away again. At night, when they were alone, he tried to start a conversation, asked about her projects, about the new paintings she was painting, but he received evasive answers. She said she was tired, that she needed to sleep early, that it was just stress. He nodded, respected, but inside he felt a growing discomfort, a tightness that he couldn't name, but that made him uneasy. It was at this stage that he decided, without telling anyone, that he needed to understand what was happening. Not out of jealousy, but out of a deep feeling that something was slipping through his fingers. I didn't want to confront, I wanted to understand. I wanted answers. And, above all, I wanted to preserve what was still left. Their relationship was still solid in the eyes of the world, but inside, he saw the cracks growing deeper. And even without proof, even without direct evidence, something inside him said it was time to open his eyes. He started paying attention to details. On schedule. On the routes. In the long silences after messages received. In the clothes chosen to go out alone. And all of this, added together, formed an annoyance that he could no longer ignore. Even so, he continued to be the husband present. He continued helping at home, participating in meetings with her family, listening to her stories carefully, even when they were full of generic phrases. I tried to remain calm, maintain balance, maintain the role of the ideal companion. But inside, the weight grew. Doubt gnawed at him in silence, and the idea of being left aside, even though he had done nothing to deserve it, hurt him deeply. Jonathan was a man of principle, but he was also human. And its limit approached every day. That week when she started going out more frequently, citing school events, pedagogical meetings, meetings with professional colleagues, he decided to take action. No scandal. No confrontations. He bought a small tracking device and placed it in her purse. He did this in silence, with a heavy heart and the secret hope that he was wrong. To discover that she really did what she said. That his discomfort was just the result of insecurity. But something inside him knew. Something deeper than reason. Something that hurt without having a name. And it was there, in that lonely and desperate gesture, that he began to write the most painful part of his story. But he didn't know that yet. He still didn't know where that decision would take him. I still didn't know what I would find. And, most importantly, I still couldn't imagine who else was involved. Because the pain of betrayal is devastating. But the pain of being deceived by everyone you love, no one is prepared to endure. In the early hours of that Tuesday morning, Jonathan was sitting at the kitchen table, with his cell phone propped in front of him and a cup of coffee cooling beside him. Isabel had left earlier than usual, citing an unexpected meeting at school. He didn't question it. He just wished her a good day and watched as she applied lipstick in front of the living room mirror, something she hadn't done in weeks just to go out to work. I didn't say anything. He just silently wrote down another line in that mental notebook where he had been recording, day after day, the details that led him to that decision. The tracker app showed a blue dot moving across the city and, for some reason he still couldn't explain, his chest hurt more from being right than from what he was yet to discover. He wished, almost childishly, that it was all just paranoia, that Isabel would contradict him with the truth, that that blue dot really led to school, and that at the end of the afternoon she would return home with a tired smile and the eyes that, one day, shone only for him. But the blue dot stopped. Not at school, not on any regular route. He stopped on a quiet residential street, surrounded by old trees and houses with high gates. Jonathan opened Google Maps, checked the address, looked for the facade. The house was beautiful, discreet, with a well-kept garden and large windows. He stood still for a few minutes, staring at the screen as if he expected something to change, for the dot to move, for everything to be in error. But the dot remained there, motionless. And inside him, something clicked. For 3 days, he observed the point's movements. Always at the same times, always at the same address. Sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the late afternoon. Isabel said she was overwhelmed, that the meetings were taking up her time, and that there was a new exhibition project with the students. He spoke with conviction, eyes fixed, without tremors in his voice. And Jonathan listened, agreed, smiled with his lips, but not with his eyes. Inside, each new lie was a nail stuck in his throat, a wound that burned more because it came from someone he still wanted to believe. The following Saturday, he decided to follow the point with his own eyes. He left the house discreetly, left the car a few blocks away and walked. The day was gray, as if the world also sensed what was about to happen. As he approached the house, he saw her car parked in front. His heart was beating unevenly, his hands were shaking, but his steps were firm. He crossed the street slowly, stopped on the other side and watched. The curtains in the room were slightly open, and it was there, through that small gap, that he saw it. Isabel was sitting on the sofa, with her legs drawn up, her face turned towards a man who approached with 2 glasses of wine. They toasted, they smiled. She touched his arm with familiarity, with intimacy. There was no guilt in his gestures. There was no hesitation. Jonathan remained there, motionless, as if time around him had stopped. The scene before his eyes dissolved all remaining certainties. I didn't need any more proof. What I saw was enough. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was the breaking of something much deeper. It was the end of a trust that took years to build and just seconds to destroy. He backed away, turned around, walked to the car, trying to control his breathing. He drove to a nearby park, parked under a tree and stayed there for hours, staring into space, with the phone on his lap and the silence consuming everything around him. The images replayed in his mind like an unwanted movie. Isabel smiling, Isabel raising her glass, Isabel touching another man with the same fingers with which she had so often stroked his face. Every detail seemed like a slow, unhurried, accurate stab. For the next few days, he didn't say a word. He returned to acting normally, with the precision of someone preparing a chess piece. He started making copies of the tracker's images, writing down dates, times, checking messages she sent to him at those same times. At the same time, I was preparing a family meeting. Nothing grand. Just a traditional Sunday lunch, like they used to do in the first years of marriage. He called her parents, invited her brothers, extended the invitation to her nephews. She seemed surprised, but didn't question it. She accepted naturally and even suggested that he make everyone's favorite dish, eggplant lasagna. The day before the meeting, Jonathan spent the night awake. Not without a doubt. But out of pain. A pain that went beyond what could be explained. Didn't sleep. Didn't eat. He just mentally reviewed every moment of the last few months, trying to understand where he lost himself, when he stopped being enough. He tried to remember the last time Isabel looked at him with true affection, the last time he felt like she was still his. And he didn't find it. The absence of those moments told him more than any words. Sunday arrived with clear skies. The house was filled with laughter, lively conversations, the smell of fresh food. Isabel moved among the guests lightly, distributed kisses and smiles, hugged her nephews, asked about her sister's college. Jonathan observed everything in silence, with a look that hid a world about to fall apart. At the table, the wine was served, the dishes distributed. Someone asked for a toast to unity, to health, to love. And it was at that moment, with everyone sitting, laughing, with glasses raised, that he slowly stood up and asked to speak. There was immediate silence. Everyone turned to him. Jonathan took a deep breath, held the cell phone in his hands and, in a calm voice, said that before any toast, he would like to share something with everyone. He opened the image gallery and projected the photo he had taken days before on the living room television. Isabel with her lover. The cups. The sofa. The touch. No sound was heard for a few seconds. Just the dry click of the image appearing. Isabel froze. The face lost color. The hands shook. The eyes ran from side to side looking for some way out, some word, some argument. But nothing came out. Her mother was the first to react. He covered his mouth with his hands and shook his head in shock. The father got up and tried to understand what he saw. The brothers murmured something inaudible. The nephews looked around without knowing how to react. And Jonathan remained there, standing, staring at Isabel, as if he wasn't expecting answers, he just wanted her to feel the weight of what she had done. She tried to speak, mumbled a few words, but he interrupted her with a gesture. This was not the time for explanations. It was the moment of truth. Isabel then tried to get up. He said it was abuse, that he had violated his privacy, that tracking someone was disrespectful. He tried to reverse the situation, to become the victim. She said she felt suffocated, that he was always controlling, that she needed air. Jonathan didn't respond. He just looked down, turned off his cell phone and left the room. The silence was absolute. The eyes were on her now. And for the first time, she realized there was no escaping reality. As he walked up the stairs to his room, Jonathan felt something different. It wasn't anger. Not sadness. It was a strange kind of peace. As if, by revealing the truth, he finally freed himself from the weight he was carrying. The pain was still there. But now it was a clean, clear, undisguised pain. He knew that from that moment on, everything would change. The house, the routine, the bonds. But I also knew that I needed to go through that to rebuild something. Not with her. But with himself. In the room, Isabel's voice was still trying to be heard, but it no longer had any strength. The words seemed hollow, the explanations fragile. And when, at the end of that afternoon, everyone had left, only the echo of what had been revealed remained. But what no one expected, was what was yet to come. The rain began to fall thinly on the roof when Jonathan came downstairs that night. The house was now empty, dishes piled in the sink, cutlery forgotten on the table like silent witnesses to a family's implosion. Isabel was sitting on the sofa, her hands crossed between her knees, her eyes swollen, not just from crying, but from fear. Her cell phone lay on the coffee table, still with unread notifications that she avoided touching. Jonathan stood before her, his shoulders hunched but his gaze steady. There was nothing more to ask. He already knew everything he needed to know about betrayal. But there was something he still didn't understand. Something that didn't fit. And that was what prevented him from turning the page once and for all. Isabel tried to explain herself again, but he raised his hand, asking for silence. He didn't want justifications. I just wanted to understand one thing, how she could keep it going for so long without anyone suspecting. Not just him, but his friends, his family, everyone. How she managed to smile at parties, toast on birthdays, exchange affectionate messages in front of others while, behind her back, she cultivated a clandestine relationship that lasted much longer than he could imagine. She lowered her head and took a deep breath, as if gathering the strength to cross a dark corridor within herself. And then, without looking directly at him, I said I wasn't alone. That someone helped her. That she would never have been able to maintain it for so long if she didn't have support. Jonathan frowned, still not fully understanding, but something inside him began to pulse differently. He approached slowly and asked, with a choked voice, who else knew? Who else was involved in that lie? Isabel hesitated. Her eyes watered again, but this time it wasn't shame. It was dread. She said that it wasn't easy to say, that he might not be able to forgive, that she herself didn't know how to face it anymore. And then, with trembling lips, He whispered a name that made Jonathan's world freeze. Melissa. The impact of that word hit his chest like an unexpected punch. Melissa. Your sister. The only blood family he had since his parents had passed away. The same person with whom he shared his childhood, the secrets of his adolescence, the achievements of his adult life. The one who knew all your fears, your loves, your disappointments. The one who sat by your side on so many difficult nights and promised that she would always be there, no matter what. The same one who, during the last few months, had been appearing strangely distant, always busy, always avoiding family gatherings, always looking away when the subject was Isabel. Jonathan took 2 steps back. His heart beat in his chest like a runaway drum. He asked if you understood correctly. If Melissa really knew about the affair. Isabel shook her head and murmured that she didn't just know. She helped. I took care of the logistics. It provided coverage. Helped with alibis. Made excuses. She was the one who warned him when Jonathan was near, who sent messages to distract him, who faked invitations and meetings that never existed. Jonathan put his head in his hands, trying to process everything. I wanted to scream, run, break something. But he didn't do any of that. He sat down slowly, staring at the emptiness in front of him. The souvenirs with Melissa came in an avalanche. The advice, the hugs, the complicit smiles. All the time she said she was by his side, all the oaths of loyalty, everything was now shattering like glass on the floor. He asked why. Why would your sister do something like that? What is the reason for her to betray her own brother, to help destroy his marriage, his life? Isabel hesitated again. He said it wasn't easy to explain. That it all started with a conversation. That Melissa was always very critical of their marriage. I thought Jonathan was rigid, cold, distant. That he gave too much to his work and too little to his relationship. That Isabel deserved someone lighter, someone who admired her for who she was, and not just for the role she played. That she, Melissa, always felt that Isabel was not completely happy, and approached her with a kind of poisoned empathy, a friendship disguised as solidarity that, little by little, evolved into complicity. Jonathan clenched his fists, his jaw clenched. This felt like a nightmare. He asked if the betrayal had started at his sister's suggestion. Isabel denied it, but her voice was fragile, without conviction. He said it was his decision, but that once he started, everything became easier with Melissa by his side. That she was the emotional support, the rational justification for continuing. That said phrases like, you have the right to be happy, he will never change, no one needs to know. That she encouraged her. And in return, he received Isabel's blind trust. Jonathan stood up, his gaze now completely different. It was no longer pain. It was something denser. A mixture of helplessness and revolt. He left the house without saying anything. He took the car and drove aimlessly until he stopped in front of his sister's building. The lights were on. He climbed the stairs without using the elevator, as if physical exertion was the only way to not explode inside. He knocked firmly on the door. Melissa answered. She was wearing a sweatshirt, barefoot, with her hair tied up in an undone bun. She smiled when she saw him, surprised by the sudden visit. But the smile faded as soon as he saw his brother's eyes. He entered without waiting for an invitation. He walked into the living room and turned around, looking at her like never before. He said he already knew everything. That Isabel had told. That he knew about her involvement, her manipulation, her betrayal. Melissa tried to deny it, but he interrupted, with a voice that sounded more like a lament. He asked why. Why did she do that? What was there between them that justified such a profound betrayal? And that's when Melissa finally gave in. He sat on the couch, his eyes teary, and said it all started with resentment. Who for years felt that Jonathan was the favorite, the admired, the exemplary man. That everyone expected her to be like him. That, throughout her life, she had to swallow compliments made to him that, to her, sounded like comparisons. That when she saw his marriage rock, she felt a strange satisfaction. And when Isabel began to open up to her, to confess her anguish, her loneliness, she saw an opportunity to be needed. To be heard. To have power. Jonathan sat across from his sister. Breathing was heavy. He said she could have said anything, vented, screamed. But crossing the line of loyalty, actively helping to destroy his marriage, was something he would never expect from someone he shared blood with. Melissa cried. He said he regretted it. Who, at first, didn't see the harm he was causing? Who thought it was just support? But over time, it became too involved. I didn't know how to back down. And now it was too late. Jonathan looked at her for a few seconds. Then he got up, walked to the door, and before leaving, he said he didn't know when, or if, he would be able to forgive. But at that moment, she was just a stranger to him with the same surname. He left without looking back. Outside, the rain was heavy. And, inside him, something died for good. But something else was beginning to emerge. Still shapeless. Still no name. But real. The truth, finally, was complete. And what would come next, would change everything. 2 days have passed since Jonathan left his sister's apartment. 2 days in which he didn't sleep, barely ate, and lived a sequence of formless hours, where time seemed like a torn, seamless fabric. Her voices, Isabel's and Melissa's, pounded in his head in irregular waves. Every word spoken, every lame justification, every attempt to camouflage responsibility behind unresolved feelings swirled in his mind like an incessant storm. He didn't respond to messages, didn't answer calls, didn't open the door to anyone. He remained silent, trapped in a cocoon of emotional rubble, searching deep within himself for a way out of what was left of his dignity. On the 3rd day, he decided to leave home. He didn't know where to go, but he needed to breathe new air, look at other walls, distance himself from the pain that seemed to have permeated every inch of that house. He walked through familiar streets, stopped at a small cafe where he used to take Isabel on her wedding anniversaries. He sat in the most isolated corner, ordered just a black coffee and watched people come and go in a hurry. At one point, he noticed a familiar figure on the sidewalk. It was Beatrice, a former coworker with whom I had lost contact. She saw him, hesitated for a second, but entered and approached. Jonathan tried to smile, but tiredness was written all over his face. Beatrice sat next to him without asking permission, like someone who understands the other's urgency just by looking at them. He asked how he was, and the answer took a while to come. When it came, it wasn't an "I'm fine," but an "I'm trying." She didn't ask anymore. I just said I was there if he wanted to talk. They remained silent for long minutes, until he began to speak. He didn't tell everything. Just part. He said he was facing an end, but that this end seemed to have no edges, that each step revealed a new fracture. Beatrice listened with genuine attention, without judging, without giving an opinion. I just listened. And it was in this simple, yet rare act that Jonathan allowed himself to truly breathe for the first time in days. When she held his hand across the table, he didn't flinch. The touch was unintentional. There was a welcome. He thanked him, said he didn't know what would happen in the next few days, but that presence helped him remember that there was life beyond what was falling apart. She smiled slightly and said he didn't need to know now. I just needed to keep going. And that was enough. The next day, Melissa showed up at his door. Not to apologize, but to return a box of old photos that was at his parents' house. Jonathan opened it, stared at her coldly, but didn't stop her from speaking. She said she knew she had nothing to justify, that she didn't expect forgiveness, but she also couldn't pretend that nothing had happened. I wanted to at least say one last thing. Jonathan, with his arms crossed, remained silent. And then she revealed something he hadn't expected. He said that Elizabeth, weeks before the betrayal was exposed, had decided to end the affair. That she had already told her lover that she no longer wanted to continue, that she needed to save the marriage, and that she was getting ready to talk to Jonathan. Melissa found out about this because she happened to hear a connection. But he didn't say anything. On the contrary, he encouraged Isabel to continue. He said it was too late to try to fix anything. That at this point, no one would believe her. Jonathan stared at her, his face still. She then looked down and said that was what bothered her the most. That, out of an impulse of personal revenge, she prevented a possible reconciliation. And now, seeing the damage, she could no longer recognize herself. Jonathan didn't respond. He took the box, thanked him curtly and closed the door. But those words stayed. And with them, a new pain set in, the pain of almost. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, there could be a reconstruction, if there was no more interference. A twisted detail that changed the course of everything. Later, when organizing the box, he found a forgotten photo among old papers. It was him and Isabel in the park, on a random Sunday. The two laughed, their faces pressed together, and in the background, Melissa, still a teenager, made a funny face at the camera. That image went through him like a knife. She thought about everything that was, everything that could have been, and finally she cried. He cried in silence, like an adult who understands that certain pains have no cure, just a reserved space in the body. At the end of that week, Isabel asked to talk. He said it wasn't about getting back together, nor about justifying it. I just wanted to talk to him one last time. They made an appointment on a park bench, close to where they used to walk in the evenings. She arrived with her eyes sunken, her shoulders slumped. There was no more makeup, no rehearsals. Just the naked version of someone who had reaped everything he sowed. Elizabeth said she did not expect forgiveness. That understood everything he had caused. That he was neither a victim nor innocent. Who chose wrong, made mistakes, got lost. But the worst part of all was realizing that he now saw Jonathan more clearly than ever. She said she betrayed him by trying to fill voids that not even she understood, and that now, seeing everything she lost, she knew that he was the only one who stayed when everyone else failed. Jonathan listened in silence, his eyes fixed on the tree branches. He didn't respond, he didn't accuse, he didn't judge. He just said that her pain was no excuse. It was a consequence. She then held his hand and asked if he still loved her. He hesitated for a few seconds and said that maybe there had always been love, but now it was too mixed with hurt, with frustration, with the memory of what was destroyed. He said he no longer wanted to carry the weight of distrust, that he no longer knew how to look at her without seeing everything he saw. Isabel nodded, released his hand and, with a choked voice, said that she respected that. But if he ever needed something, even if it was just to listen, she would be there. Jonathan stood up and said he no longer needed to be heard by her. He needed to be heard for himself. And he left. The following days were strangely serene. Jonathan resumed part of his routine, returned to work, and began organizing his move. He sold the house they lived in for so many years and rented a small apartment near the center. A new place, without ghosts. Beatrice helped him with the move. He arrived with boxes, tools and a homemade cake. They laughed together, organized the furniture, put the pictures in place. For the first time in a long time, Jonathan felt there was room for something new. It wasn't love yet. But it was lightness. The first night in that new home, he lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling. He thought of everything. In who he was, in who he believed he was, in who he stopped being together. But most of all, he thought about who he wanted to become from now on. And for the first time, he didn't feel afraid. Just a strange, comforting peace that, even among the wreckage, it was still possible to rebuild. It was still possible to choose differently. The next morning, he received a short message from Melissa. It just said, "I'm leaving town. I hope one day you'll be able to look at me with less pain. I love you, even if you hate me now." He didn't respond. But it saved the message. Because even if forgiveness didn't exist yet, he knew that what he felt wasn't hate. It was disappointment. And disappointments, he had learned, sometimes don't heal. They just settle down. And so, with the sun invading the window of that new apartment, Jonathan took a deep breath and allowed himself something he hadn't done in a long time: hope. Not because of the past, but for what, finally, could come. The new apartment was silent, excessively silent, as if every wall was still blank, waiting to be filled with sounds Jonathan didn't yet have to offer. In the first few days, the absence of familiar noises hurt like a ghost breathing too close. There were no footsteps in the hallway, no laughter coming from the other room, nor the sound of Isabel's keys turning in the door at the end of the day. Every object in the new space seemed to be in the right place, but it lacked soul. Jonathan maintained an almost mechanical routine. I woke up early, made coffee in silence, worked obsessively and, at night, I looked out the window on the 8th floor, trying to understand if this newly gained freedom was in fact a form of liberation or just another form of masked loneliness. It was difficult to know. There were times when he felt like he was rebuilding himself. In others, it just seemed to be piling up the rubble of itself into a new form. Beatrice started to appear more frequently. Not in an invasive way, but with a gentle presence, which respected time and silence. Sometimes he brought a book, sometimes an old film. He didn't touch on the subject of Isabel or Melissa, as if he knew that this was still too sensitive territory to be explored. Jonathan watched her with a mixture of care and fear. It was strange to feel something again. Strange and at the same time dangerous. Because, without even realizing it, he had already built within himself a natural barrier to any feeling that came too close. Still, he allowed his presence. Not because he was ready for something new, but because he couldn't take just himself for company anymore. On one of those nights, when they stayed on the balcony talking about banal things, Beatrice commented, almost casually, that the most difficult thing about deep pain was not feeling it, but accepting that it might never go away. That human beings tend to seek clear endings, clean solutions, when in fact most feelings remain unfinished, like books with pages torn out. Jonathan remained silent, but the phrase stuck in his mind for days. And perhaps that's why he decided to write. He started a new notebook, where every day he recorded memories, reflections, fragments of himself. It was an exercise to name what hurt, to organize the internal wreckage, to rediscover, within herself, the man she had stopped knowing. In the process, he discovered things he didn't understand before. He realized that in many moments he had silenced his own desires to maintain peace in the marriage. That he had lost the ability to listen to himself. That he no longer knew what he really liked, what made him happy, without it being linked to Isabel or the need to keep something working. One late afternoon, he received an unexpected call. He was the lawyer who took care of the division of assets and the divorce process. He reported that Isabel had signed all the papers, without contesting anything. He had given up part of the assets to which he would have been entitled by law. He said he wanted this to end with as few legal wounds as possible. Jonathan thanked him and hung up. He felt immediate relief, followed by emptiness. What had been the center of his world for years was now finalized in a paper envelope, in a document with signatures and stamps. The legal end of something that had died long before in both of their hearts. That same day, when he opened his email, he found a message from Melissa. Very short. Just a request for forgiveness, sincere, without appeals. Jonathan read it and deleted it. Not out of anger. But because I knew that no words there could change the past. The pain caused by her, by the silent betrayal, still lived in his body with deep roots. He knew that one day it would stop bleeding. But not at that moment. For now, all he could do was keep his distance and take care of his own reconstruction. The dilemma that began to arise in his mind, however, was different. With everything finished, with the most obvious wounds exposed, the most difficult question remained: how to move forward without carrying the shadow of what happened. It was easy to tell that he had freed himself. But there was still a weight in the decisions, a constant doubt in each gesture involving the other. He felt that when Beatrice touched him, even if gently. He felt this when he looked at old photos and tried not to remember. He felt this even in moments when he was alone and wanted to smile, but felt guilty for being happy after all. It was a complex moral dilemma. How to allow yourself to feel again without seeming disloyal to the pain experienced. How to make space for someone else without betraying yourself. And, worse, how do you know if the pain you felt wasn't becoming a comfortable shelter to avoid taking risks again? Jonathan took a deep dive into these questions. I spent nights writing about it, trying to understand if I still knew what love was or if everything had become just a conditioned reflex of care and attention. He wrote that perhaps the deepest betrayal was not that of Isabel or Melissa, but his own, when he stopped prioritizing himself in the name of a relationship that, in the end, had already expired a long time ago. It was on a Saturday afternoon, while walking with Beatrice through a street market, that something began to change. She laughed at something banal, and he, for the first time, laughed too. A light, involuntary laugh that escaped without asking for permission. And it was at that moment that he realized that perhaps the new beginning would not come as a snap, a grand event, but in small ways. In the coffee that was good, in the music that played in the background, in the light touch of someone who didn't demand more than he could give. That same night, she invited him to dinner. A simple invitation. He hesitated, and she noticed. He said it wasn't a step, it wasn't a commitment, it was just a meal. Jonathan accepted. During dinner, they talked about books, about cinema, about the absurdities of everyday life. He said little. But when he spoke, she listened. And when he was silent, she didn't fill the spaces with words, but with presence. It was a new dynamic, no rush, no demands. He realized there was something there. It wasn't love yet. But it was seed. In the days that followed, Jonathan allowed himself more. He started answering messages, accepting invitations, looking people in the eyes without carrying the weight of always looking devastated. It was a slow, sometimes painful, but necessary process. He understood that he no longer needed to pretend to be strong all the time. That being vulnerable was not failure. That there was no longer a rush to get anywhere. That life was now about rebuilding, not repeating. When he returned to the park where he used to walk with Isabel, he didn't do it to remember, but to give new meaning. He sat on the same bench where she had told him she still loved him, where he had said there might always be love, but not trust. And there, alone, he looked up at the sky between the leaves and told himself that everything was okay. That pain had fulfilled its role. That anger had been fuel, but it no longer needed to guide his steps. And that, above all, he deserved to feel again. Not out of revenge, not out of necessity. But by choice. Over the next few days, he continued writing. No longer about pain, but about possibilities. He created a routine that included small joys, cooking for himself, going for a walk at dusk, learning something new. He started playing the guitar, something he always wanted but never had the time for. And when he got the chords wrong, he laughed alone. This was how it was rebuilt. Laughing at mistakes, accepting breaks, respecting time. Beatrice was still nearby. Don't invade. He just followed. And Jonathan understood that, perhaps, true love is not the one that burns like a fire, but the one that heats like a fireplace. That does not demand, but welcomes. And there, in this new rhythm, he began to glimpse something greater than revenge or reparation. He began to glimpse peace. And although there were still shadows, there were also open windows. And maybe that was what mattered now. Breathe. Continue. And allow yourself, one day at a time. That morning, the sound of the doorbell broke the silence of the new apartment with an uncomfortable punctuality. Jonathan was still in his slippers, holding a mug of lukewarm coffee when he opened the door and came across Isabel. I hadn't seen her in weeks, since our last conversation on the park bench. She was different. The thinner face, the hastily tied hair, and the eyes, the same ones he once knew so well, now seemed like a tired enigma. Before he said anything, she raised her hand with a white envelope. He said he wasn't there to revive arguments or beg for chances, he just needed to deliver something in person. Jonathan stared at her for a few seconds before nodding and opening the way for her to enter. She refused, saying it wouldn't be appropriate. He would just hand over the envelope and leave. The paper had his name handwritten in the same handwriting he recognized from the old notes left on his pillow. Inside, there was a letter. Not a love letter, nor a letter of regret, but an outburst that sounded almost like an emotional testament. Isabel confessed that she had started therapy. She said that, for the first time, she was being confronted with truths that she had avoided for years. He spoke of his childhood suffocated by expectations, of previous relationships in which he learned to cancel himself, of the way in which, alongside Jonathan, he created an idealized persona that he would never be able to sustain. It revealed that, even though I loved him, I never knew how to deal with the fact that he was too constant for someone who lived on an internal tightrope. Which he sabotaged not out of contempt, but out of fear. Fear of not being enough, of being discovered as a fraud, of seeing the image of perfection that they both tried to maintain crumble. Jonathan read the letter sitting on the couch, taking his time. The words echoed with force not because they were revealing, but because they exposed layers that he never knew existed. And for the first time, he realized that Elizabeth was devoid of defenses. That wasn't a strategy, it wasn't manipulation. It was a confession. The raw truth of a woman in tatters trying to finally understand herself. When he finished reading, he put the paper in his desk drawer. He felt neither relief nor anger. Just a silent, mature understanding, like someone looking at a wound that has already healed and accepting the mark. In the following days, he decided to travel. I needed distance, not just physical, but emotional. He chose a small coastal town, with stone streets and colorful houses, where time seemed to have a different rhythm. He rented a simple inn, with windows open to the sea, and spent the first few days just walking on the sand, letting the wind carry away everything that was still weighing him. I wrote every morning, always sitting on the balcony, with the sound of the waves as a soundtrack. In one of these texts, he wrote down a phrase that he would later emphasize: forgiving is not forgetting, it is freeing yourself from the control that pain exerts over what I can still live. Beatrice sent spaced messages, respecting his time. He responded lightly, sharing photos of the landscapes, a few words about the weather, and little by little, he let himself miss her. When he returned, he found a note stuck to the door: dinner on Friday? No rush, no labels. Just really hungry. He smiled to himself as he read. He accepted the invitation, more because he wanted to be with her than because of the food. At dinner, the atmosphere was relaxed. She had prepared a mushroom risotto that had been burned just a little, and scoffed at it before he even commented. They laughed. They talked about films and books, but inevitably, the subject delved deeper. Beatrice asked if he still believed in love. Jonathan was silent for a few seconds before responding that love, for him, had stopped being an ideal and had become a construct. Who was no longer expecting an overwhelming passion, but rather a sincere exchange, without masks. He said that he now knew that what destroys is not the absence of feelings, but the absence of truth. She listened carefully, then said that she had also loved wrongly. Who had also been silent when he should have spoken. Which also needed to rebuild itself from the ashes once. That was what brought them together. Not the pain itself, but what they decided to do with it. Over time, the relationship between the two gained clearer contours, but without haste. Jonathan invited her to small programs, an art exhibition, a local music festival, walks in the park. Nothing grand, but everything done with intention. There was a lightness he didn't know, an absence of suffocating expectations. And it was there, in this freedom of being without needing to prove anything, that he found comfort. He still had reservations, fears left over from the recent fall. But with her, he didn't feel like he needed to protect himself all the time. One night, after returning from a theater, Beatrice commented on the house he sold. He asked if he didn't miss it. Jonathan responded that he missed who he was in that house, not the house itself. And now, every space he occupied was also a space he chose to fill with awareness. He said he had relearned how to be company for himself, and that this made any place livable. Beatrice then said that she admired that about him. That there was a silent force there, different from those that imposed themselves. Jonathan thanked her and, for the first time, held her hand without hesitation. It was a simple gesture, but full of meaning. It wasn't unbridled passion. It was acceptance. It was presence. A few weeks later, he was invited to an event at the school where Beatrice worked. It was a showcase of student projects, and she introduced him as someone special. He found the term strange, but didn't react. Just smiled. When she went away to resolve something, one of the teachers commented to him that Beatrice spoke of him with great affection. He said she seemed more peaceful since they started seeing each other. Jonathan thanked him, but it affected him. When he returned home that night, he thought about what he really wanted from now on. I still had doubts, I still carried scars. But he knew he didn't want to hide behind them. No more. The following week, during a home-cooked dinner, he was the one who brought up the subject. He said that he still didn't know how to name what he felt, but that, alongside her, he had rediscovered parts of himself that he thought were lost. That I felt peace, and that I didn't see it as little. She held his hand and said he didn't need to give his name now. That he felt the same, and that time would take care of the rest. And so, without making any major declarations, they decided to move forward together, one step at a time, with the truth as their only pact. One day, walking through the central market, Jonathan saw Isabel from afar. She was alone, with a bag in her hand, leafing through a book at a used book stand. His first impulse was to turn away. But then, he took a deep breath and approached. She saw him, and for a second, the world seemed to stop. They exchanged a brief greeting. Jonathan asked how she was, and she said she was getting better. He said he was fine. They didn't talk more than 2 minutes. But in the end, she smiled slightly and thanked him for stopping. He nodded and left. And when he turned the corner, he finally felt that the past had turned into memory. Still there, still part of its history, but no longer its weight. On the way back, he thought about how life had changed. How, even when everything seemed lost, there was always a starting point, even if small. And it was exactly this thought that accompanied him now, that the deepest new beginnings do not begin with euphoria, but with silence, courage and, above all, with truth. And he, finally, was ready to live it. Not as a survivor, but as someone who consciously decided to live. Time passed with a dignity that none of those involved imagined they could sustain. And when the wind finally blew more calmly over the rubble of what remained, each one had already gone in their own direction, taking with them not only scars, but profound transformations that shaped who they became from then on. Jonathan, now the owner of a less automatic and more conscious routine, lived in an apartment that had become a faithful reflection of his reconstruction. Every detail there had purpose, the plants that he learned to care for and that now bloomed without asking permission, the books that filled the shelves with new stories, the paintings hanging with hand-picked memories. Nothing there was random. For the first time in years, everything was in the right place, including him. Alongside Beatrice, he had rediscovered the joy of simple things, but above all, he had found a type of love that was not packaged in promises, but in presence, in respect, in space to breathe. She, in turn, was a woman marked by her own pain, but who no longer carried the armor of someone who expected to be hurt. With Jonathan, he learned to trust again, to allow others to get closer without it meaning giving up himself. The two, united not by need, but by choice, built a solid and honest relationship, where each step was taken clearly and where the ghosts of the past were no longer allowed to rule the silences. Jonathan never mentioned Isabel again, nor Melissa. Not by omission, but because there was nothing more to be said. The pages had been turned with the right weight, without the need for tearing or erasing. They were lived. They were felt. And now, they belonged to the past. Isabel, after months of introspection, decided to change cities. He didn't run away. She chose to start over in another place where people's eyes didn't constantly remind her of who she was. He only took with him the essentials and the courage to try a new version of himself. Therapy continued as part of his routine. She became a volunteer in an art project in underprivileged communities, and there she rediscovered a purer version of what she always wanted to be. For the first time, he created an individual exhibition based not on technique, but on experience. The canvases expressed confusion, pain, liberation. And it was amid these disordered colors that she began to recognize herself again. Missing Jonathan came sporadically, but it no longer hurt. It was a memory that taught, not punished. She knew she had lost something precious, but she also knew that she was now someone else. And that old version of yourself, the one that lived in fear for so long, no longer had space there. Melissa, on the other hand, did not have the same mild outcome. Despite having left the city, the guilt did not travel with her. It was left. Infiltrated in her thoughts, in the long and lonely days, in the early mornings when she found herself confronted with her own reflection. He tried to build something new, but in each new bond, there was the shadow of what he did. No friendship deepened without her thinking, what if they find out about me? What if they found out what I was capable of? It was eating her up inside. She tried to write, she tried to reinvent herself as an entrepreneur, but there was an abyss between what she showed and what she felt. One day, he tried to contact Jonathan again, sending a long message, full of confessions, tears and belated requests for forgiveness. He read it. With respect, but no response. And in that silence, she understood that there is no way back from certain mistakes. That forgiveness sometimes doesn't come in words, but in limits. And that was his limit. One that she would need to respect forever. The moral dilemma that once plagued him, about how to start over without seeming like a betrayal of the past, dissolved over time, replaced by a lighter truth: continuing is an act of self-love, not disloyalty. Jonathan now knew that he was not responsible for healing anyone, that it was not his duty to maintain relationships out of pity, out of nostalgia or out of fear. I had finally learned that truly loving someone also means knowing when to let go. And alongside Beatrice, this learning became every day. In small discussions that ended in hugs, in differences that did not cause conflicts, but enriched coexistence. It was an adult love, without urgency, but with a lot of truth. On a summer afternoon, sitting in a cafe, Beatrice talked about the future. Not as someone who presses, but as someone who dreams. Jonathan didn't shy away from the subject. He said he was thinking about writing a book. Not about what he lived, but about what he learned. About how people can break themselves without destroying themselves. About how pain teaches, but only transforms if we are willing to face it. She smiled and said he should start soon. And he started. That night. Sitting at the same desk where he read Isabel's letter months before, he wrote the first lines with steady hands. I didn't want revenge or exposure. I wanted to tell a story about fall and rebirth, about love and choice, about loss and clarity. The book had no pretensions of success. It was an intimate gesture. But, little by little, it gained readers. He posted excerpts on social media, and the response was immediate. People who recognized each other, who were grateful, who said, "You put into words what I could never say." And it was there, between one message and another, that Jonathan understood the real purpose of everything he experienced. It wasn't about winning. It was about turning pain into a bridge, not a prison. In the last chapter of the book, he wrote something that defined his journey with brutal and sweet precision at the same time: I wasn't just betrayed by those I loved, I was betrayed by those I trusted. But the greatest betrayal I experienced was from myself, when I stopped listening to myself. Today, I don't want revenge. I want peace. And it lives where the truth lives in silence. The text went viral. And more than applause, it brought sincere connections. People started sharing their own stories with him. And that's how Jonathan realized that even in the darkest days, there was purpose. That even the deepest scars could be compasses. One Sunday morning, while walking with Beatrice through the park, she mentioned that she had been offered a better position in another city, a few hours away. He said he hadn't accepted it yet. I wanted to know what he thought. Jonathan looked at her calmly and said he didn't want to stop her, but he also didn't want to lose her. That maybe it was time to start a new stage together. And it was there, with her bare feet on the grass and a light heart, that he asked her to stay. Not with promises, but with plans. Not with vows, but with space. And she stayed. And so, life went on. With scars that no longer hurt. With memories that no longer burned. With bonds that were now choices. Jonathan has not forgotten what he experienced. But he used every piece to build something better. Not for others. For yourself. Now we want to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Comment below which part touched you the most and what you would do if you were in Jonathan's shoes. Take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any of the next stories. Here, all the narratives are fictional, but the feelings are real, and our goal is to show, in an intense way, how betrayal destroys the trust, love and peace of those affected by it. We make it clear once again, this channel does not support, does not encourage or normalize any type of betrayal. Until the next story.